Exiled at 12, she built a pine corridor. Halvor Eriksson, who had survived 11 Dakota winters, told her plainly, "A child cannot keep herself alive out there. The wolves will find her before Christmas, and if they don't, the cold will." She had 14 cents, no family, and needed shelter from cold that killed grown men. On January 12th, 1888, the temperature dropped 40 degrees in 3 hours. But 5 months earlier, Anja Mikkelsen had never spent a single night outside a house in her life. She arrived in Dakota Territory on a Tuesday in April 1887, pressed against the window of an westbound train car with 43 other children who had no one left to claim them. The Children's Aid Society called it an orphan train. The children called it nothing. They had learned not to name things they couldn't keep. Anja was 12 years old. Her father had died of typhoid in the Bowery 2 years before, coughing blood into a rag while she held his hand. Her mother followed 6 months later, her lungs full of consumption, whispering words Anja couldn't hear over the rattle in her chest. After that came the lodging house on Worth Street, 18 months of gray wool blankets and watered soup, and women who smiled with their mouths but not their eyes. Then the train. The stops blurred together. Omaha, Sioux City. Children lined up on depot platforms while farmers walked past, examining teeth and arms like livestock at auction. Boys went first, always boys first, for the field work, then the sturdy girls, then the pretty ones, then whoever was left. At Grafton, Dakota Territory, a woman named Mrs. Lungren pointed at Anja and said, "That one. She looks like she can cook." Anja could cook. She could also clean, mend, tend babies, haul water, scrub floors, and make herself invisible when the adults were angry. She had learned these skills in the lodging house, where invisible children survived and visible ones got sent away. The Lungren homestead sat 14 miles west of Grafton, in a sea of grass that stretched in every direction until it met the sky. The house was sod, walls cut from the prairie itself, 2 feet thick, topped with a roof of tar paper and more sod. Inside it smelled of earth and smoke and the particular staleness of too many people in too small a space. There were 5 Lungren children. Anja was not one of them. She slept in the lean-to attached to the sod house, on a straw tick that rustled when she breathed. She woke before dawn to start the fire. She hauled water from the well, a quarter-mile distant. She cooked 3 meals a day, washed the clothes, minded the youngest children, and spoke only when spoken to. For 4 months, this was her life. It was not good, but it was alive. And alive was more than many orphan train children could claim. Then she made a mistake. The youngest Lundgren child was a girl named Kirsten, age 6, with white blonde hair and a gap where her front teeth had been. Kirsten followed Anja everywhere, to the well, to the chicken coop, to the garden. She asked questions constantly. Why is the sky blue? Where do rabbits sleep? What are those marks in your book? The marks were letters. Anja's mother had taught her to read before the sickness came, tracing words in the margins of a hymnal by candlelight. Reading was the one thing Anja had left of her mother, the one thing the lodging house and the train and the Lungrens couldn't take away. Kirsten wanted to learn the marks. Anja taught her. They practiced in secret, in the lean-to, using a stick to scratch letters in the dirt floor. A for apple, B for barn. C for Kirsten's name, which started with a K, but that came later. Mrs. Lungren found them on an August afternoon, Kirsten sounding out the word cat, while Anja guided her finger through the letters. Mrs. Lundgren could not read. Her husband could not read. None of the 5 Lundgren children could read. Reading was for town people, for soft people, for people who didn't have to wring a living from grass and dirt. Reading was, in Mrs. Lundgren's understanding, an insult. She grabbed Kirsten by the arm and pulled her out of the lean-to. She turned to Anya with a face Anya had seen before, on the lodging house women when a child asked too many questions, on the farmers at the depot when a child didn't look strong enough. "You think you're better than us," Mrs. Lundgren said. Anya said nothing. There was nothing to say. "Get out! Take your things and get out." Anya's things fit in her apron pocket, a sewing kit that had been her mother's, with 3 needles, a thimble, and a spool of thread. 14 cents she had found in the yard over 4 months and saved without knowing why. The clothes on her back, a wool dress, a cotton petticoat, a shawl that was more holes than wool. Mr. Lungren added a camp hatchet. It had belonged to their oldest son, who had lost it. Anya had found it in the tall grass behind the privy. The Lungrens didn't want it back. They didn't want anything that had touched her hands. "Go east," Mr. Lungren said. "The railroad's in Grafton. You can get to Fargo from there. They have an orphanage." Anya had spent 18 months in an orphanage. She knew what they were. She knew what happened to girls who went in and didn't come out. She walked west instead. The road was a wagon track through grass that reached her shoulders. The sun beat down. Flies circled. By noon of the first day, her feet bled where the old boots had rubbed through her stockings. She slept that night in a haystack, belonging to no one she could see. She ate nothing because she had nothing. In the morning, she walked on. By the 3rd day, she had learned to find water in the low places, where the grass grew darkest green. She had learned which farmhouses had dogs and which did not. She had learned to walk in the wheel ruts because the grass hid snakes that struck at ankles. She had not learned where she was going. West meant away. That was enough. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, a wagon overtook her on the road. The driver was an old man with a face like cracked leather and hands that seemed too large for his wrists. He pulled up alongside her and studied her for a long moment without speaking. "Where are you headed?" he asked. "West," Anya said. "West is a direction, not a place. Where's your family?" "I don't have one." The old man's eyes moved over her, the torn dress, the cracked boots, the hatchet hanging from a strip of cloth at her waist. He had seen this before. Everyone on the frontier had seen this before. Children came out on the trains, and sometimes the placements didn't take, and sometimes the children ended up on the roads, and sometimes they were found in the spring when the snow melted. "I'm Halvor Eriksson," he said. "I've been homesteading this territory since '76. I've buried 2 wives and a son in that time, all to the winter. You understand what I'm telling you?" "Yes, sir." "No, you don't. You can't." He shifted on the wagon seat. "Winter here isn't like winter back east. Temperatures drop to 40 below, 50 below. Wind blows so hard you can't see your hand in front of your face. I've seen men freeze to death walking from their barn to their house, 100 feet, and they couldn't find the door." Anya said nothing. "You need walls. You need a stove. You need 4 cords of wood split and stacked before the first hard freeze. That's 400 cubic feet of timber, more than you weigh, girl, many times over. A grown man works all summer to lay in that much wood. You're a child. You don't have a summer. You have maybe 8 weeks before the killing cold comes." "I can work," Anya said. "I'm strong." Eriksson laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Strong doesn't signify. A child cannot keep herself alive out there. The wolves will find her before Christmas, and if they don't, the cold will. You're walking toward your death, girl." "Then I'm walking toward it," Anya said. "I won't go back." Eriksson studied her again. Something moved behind his eyes. Memory, perhaps, of other stubborn children, of his son who had been stubborn too, whose grave was a mound of rocks on a hill overlooking his north pasture. "There's an orphanage in Fargo," he said. I'll pay your train fare from Grafton. You can start over there. No, you'll die out here. Maybe. Erickson shook his head slowly. You're choosing death. I'm choosing not to go back. If that's the same thing, then that's what I'm choosing. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked up his reins. The Turtle Mountains are about 30 miles west, he said. There's timber there, pine and spruce and fir. Not much else, but there's timber. If you're determined to die, at least die where there's wood to burn. He drove on without looking back. Anya watched the wagon disappear into the grass. Then she turned her face west toward the low, dark line on the horizon that might have been hills or might have been clouds, and she walked. She reached the Turtle Mountains on the 8th day. They were not mountains in any way she understood the word, just low, rolling hills covered in dark green forest, rising from the prairie like islands from a sea. The air smelled different here, wet, alive. The sound of wind changed from a whisper to a rushing as millions of pine needles caught the breeze and sang. On the first night, she made camp at the edge of the forest, too tired to go farther. She had eaten nothing but service berries and one rabbit she'd found dead by the road. She didn't know what had killed it, but hunger didn't allow for questions. Her hands shook. Her vision swam. She could feel her body beginning to consume itself, burning muscle for fuel because there was nothing else to burn. She found a deadfall of pine branches, a tree that had lost a limb in some past storm, and crawled beneath it. The branches formed a low ceiling, maybe 2 feet high. She curled into a ball on the needle-covered ground. And she noticed something. It was warmer underneath the branches. Not warm, still cold, still uncomfortable, but warmer than the open air. The wind that had been cutting through her shawl all day couldn't reach her here. The branches above her formed a barrier, and the needles, millions of them, caught the moving air and stilled it. Still air doesn't steal heat the way moving air does. She remembered her father explaining this in the Bowery when she'd asked why her wool coat kept her warm even when it was wet. The fibers trap tiny pockets of air, he'd said. The air can't move, so it can't carry your heat away. That's why wool works. That's why feathers work. Anything that traps still air will keep you warm. Pine needles trap still air. She lay under the deadfall, shivering but alive, and she thought about what Erickson had said. 4 cords of wood, a stove, walls, all the things she didn't have and couldn't get. But birds didn't have stoves. Deer didn't have walls. Animals survived the winter without any of it. How? They found shelter. They found places where the wind couldn't reach them and the cold couldn't find them. They curled into small spaces and let their bodies do the work of warming the air around them. If she made the space small enough, just big enough for one person, and if she trapped enough still air around it, the thought was fragile, incomplete. She didn't know if it would work. She didn't know anything really except that she was going to die if she didn't try something, and this was the only something she had. In the morning, she began to build. The site she chose was a natural hollow between 3 spruce trees in a dense part of the forest where the canopy blocked most of the wind. She'd walked for hours to find it, looking for something she couldn't quite name until she saw it, a place that felt protected. The trees stood like walls. The ground sloped slightly so water would drain away. A fallen log provided a windbreak on one side. She started with poles. The hatchet was small, barely 1.5 pounds, with a hickory handle worn smooth by the Lungren boy's grip. But it was sharp, and sharp was what mattered. She chose young pines, 2 or 3 inches thick, and she chopped at the base until they fell. Each one took 15-20 minutes. Her arms burned, her shoulders screamed. By the end of the first day, she had cut 4 poles. She needed at least 20. On the second day, her hands blistered. On the third day, the blisters tore open. She wrapped her palms in strips of her petticoat and kept cutting. By the end of the first week, she had 23 poles, each 8 to 10 feet long. She found a straight branch for a ridge pole, 12 feet thick as her forearm. She spent 2 days trying to lift it into position before she figured out the trick. She lashed it between two tree trunks at chest height, then raised one end at a time, shimming rocks beneath to hold each gain. The ridge pole was up. The frame could begin. She leaned the angled poles against the ridge pole 2 feet apart, forming an A shape. The structure looked fragile, nothing like a house, nothing like walls. It looked like what it was, a child's desperate guess at shelter. But it was something, and something was more than nothing. Martha Henriksen found her in mid-September, 3 weeks into the construction. The older woman had been riding the edge of her property, checking fence lines, when she spotted movement in the trees. She tied her horse and walked in, expecting to find a deer or perhaps one of Lungren's wandering cattle. Instead, she found a girl, no more than 12 or 13, dragging a spruce bough twice her length toward what looked like a skeleton made of sticks. "What in God's name are you doing?" Martha asked. Anya spun, the bough falling from her hands. She looked at the older woman, sturdy, weathered, with hands that had clearly done their share of work, and she calculated. Friend or enemy, threat or help. She'd been wrong before. The Lungrens had seemed kind at first. "Building a shelter," she said. "A shelter." Martha walked around the structure, studying it. The frame was complete now, ridgepole, angled poles, horizontal branches woven between them to form a lattice. Boughs had been laid across maybe a quarter of it, needles pointing down, layered like shingles on a roof. "For the winter?" "Yes, ma'am." "Alone?" "Yes, ma'am." Martha Henriksen had been homesteading alone for 3 years, since her husband Niels had been kicked in the head by their draft horse and died in her arms before she could get him to the house. She had survived 3 Dakota winters with nothing but her 14-year-old son and her own 2 hands. She knew what winter demanded, she knew what it cost, and she knew that what this girl was building would not survive December. "I've seen trappers make brush shelters," Martha said. "For a night, maybe 2. You're talking about 4 months, 5 months. What happens when 2 feet of snow buries this?" Anya had been waiting for this question. She had asked it of herself every night as she lay on the cold ground, wondering if she was building her own coffin. "The snow will make it warmer," she said. "Snow traps air, like wool. Snow will crush it flat. You'll suffocate. The branches will hold it up. They're springy." Anya touched one of the spruce boughs she'd laid. "Feel. They push back." Martha felt. The bough was stiff, resilient. It didn't collapse under her palm. "And food?" Martha asked. "What will you eat when the snow is 3 feet deep and the rabbits are hiding?" Anya had no good answer. She had been snaring rabbits with nooses made from horsehair she'd found caught on fences, 1 or 2 a week, not enough to build strength, barely enough to survive. She'd foraged for service berries and wild onions until the first frost killed them. She had no plan for January. "I'll find something," she said. "You'll starve." "Maybe." Martha studied her. The girl was thin, far too thin. Her dress hung loose on her frame. Her cheeks were hollow, her eyes too large. She was already starving, just slowly. But her hands. Martha looked at the girl's hands wrapped in stained cloth, and she saw beneath the bandages the raw, weeping blisters that meant real work. This wasn't a child playing at survival. This was a child who had decided to live or die on her own terms. "You're clever," Martha said, "but clever doesn't keep you alive in January. You need a stove. You need walls." "I don't have a stove. I don't have walls. I have this." Come to my place. Sleep in my hay barn until you come to your senses. It's warm enough. You can work for your keep. I can always use another pair of hands. Anya shook her head. Thank you, but no. Why not? Because if I go with you, I'll never leave. I'll work for you until I'm old enough to marry, and then I'll work for whoever marries me, and I'll never be anything but someone else's hands. I'd rather die here than live like that. Martha was quiet for a long moment. She thought of her own mother, who had worked herself to death on a farm in Sweden. She thought of her daughter, who had died at 3 months old before she could become anyone's hands at all. She thought of herself, homesteading alone, refusing to remarry, refusing to give up the land that had cost her husband's life. All right, she said, but I'm coming back. And if you're dead when I do, I'm going to be very annoyed. She walked back to her horse. Halfway there, she turned. My name is Martha Henriksen. My place is 2 miles east at the base of the hills. If you change your mind, I won't. If you change your mind, Martha repeated. Come find me. She rode away. Anya watched her go, then turned back to her pile of boughs. She had a shelter to finish. Gunnar Lungren came in early October. He had heard the rumors. Everyone in Pembina County had heard the rumors. The orphan girl the Lungrens had turned out was living in the mountains like an animal, building a nest of sticks, talking about surviving the winter. People found it entertaining. Some felt guilty. Most assumed she'd be dead by Thanksgiving and forgotten by Christmas. Gunnar found it inconvenient. If the girl died on land adjacent to his grazing range, there would be questions. The county might investigate. His name would be whispered in the same breath as words like murder and neglect. He was a respectable man, a church-going man, a man with political ambitions. He could not afford to have an orphan's corpse attached to his reputation. He found her in the forest, layering boughs onto a structure that looked more complete than he'd expected. The frame was invisible now, buried under a foot of greenery that sloped from a central ridge down to the ground on both sides. From a distance, it looked almost like a natural formation, a mound of brush that the forest had somehow produced on its own. Up close, it looked like desperation given form. You need to leave, Gunnar said, dismounting from his horse. Anya turned. She recognized him instantly, the square jaw, the blonde beard, the way he looked at her like she was something scraped off his boot. This isn't your land, she said. It's government land. Nobody's claimed it. It's my cattle range. You're scaring my stock. I haven't seen any cattle. They avoid this area. Because of you. Anya almost laughed. Cattle didn't care about a girl building a shelter. Cattle cared about grass and water and not being eaten by wolves. But she didn't laugh. She had learned not to laugh at men like Gunnar Lundgren. I'm not leaving, she said. Gunnar's face darkened. He swung down from his horse and strode toward her, grabbing her arm above the elbow. Listen to me, girl. You die out here, it's going to be my name they whisper about. Lungren, who put out that orphan. Lungren, who let a child freeze. I won't have it. I won't have my good name dragged through the mud by a thankless piece of trash from the city. Anya didn't flinch. She'd been grabbed by men before. She knew the difference between a man who wanted to hurt her and a man who wanted to scare her. Gunnar wanted to scare her. Then I won't die, she said. You will die. Everyone knows it. That fool woman Henriksen, she's telling everyone you're building a nest of sticks. Come spring, they'll find your bones, and I'll be the villain. He released her arm. Get on the train. Go to Fargo. I'll pay your fare, 50 cents, whatever it costs. Just get out of this territory. No. I'm offering you a way out. You're offering me a cage. I won't trade one cage for another. Gunnar's eyes narrowed. Stubborn. Just like your kind. You people come out here on those trains thinking you deserve something. thinking the world owes you a living. It doesn't. You'll beg before December, and when you do, I won't help you. I'll watch you crawl back to Grafton, and I'll laugh. He mounted his horse. You're going to regret this. Maybe, Anya said, but at least the regret will be mine. He rode away. Anya stood where she was for a long moment, trembling, not with fear. She was long past fear of men like Gunnar Lundgren, trembling with anger, trembling with the effort of not screaming, not crying, not giving him the satisfaction of knowing he had touched her. Then she picked up her hatchet and went back to work. She had 8 weeks until winter. She couldn't afford to waste time on men who wanted her dead. The first hard frost came on October 8th. Anya woke to find the world turned white, not snow, but frost, a glittering coat of ice crystals that covered every surface and made the air sharp as broken glass in her lungs. Her breath plumed, her fingertips were numb. The water in her cup had frozen solid overnight. She crawled into the shelter and pressed her body against the bow wall. Slowly, painfully, she warmed. The sun rose. The frost melted. The day warmed enough to work. But the message was clear. Winter was coming, and it was coming soon. She worked faster, 10 hours a day, 12, 14. She cut boughs until her arms wouldn't lift. Then she dragged boughs until her legs wouldn't move. Then she collapsed and slept and woke before dawn to do it again. The second layer went on over the first, doubling the thickness. 12 inches of boughs now, needles overlapping needles, creating a mat so dense that she couldn't push her finger through it. She lined the floor with 18 inches of spruce boughs, springy, fragrant, warm enough to separate her body from the frozen ground. She dug a small pit at the entrance, 18 inches deep, a cold well where the heaviest, coldest air could sink below the level where she would sleep. She wove a door from flexible willow branches and boughs, something she could pull across the entrance at night to seal the shelter closed. By mid-October, the structure was complete. It was 10 feet long, 18 inches wide at the floor, 4 feet tall at the peak. Just big enough for one person. Just small enough that one person's body heat might be enough to warm it. She slept inside for the first time on October 20th. Outside, the temperature dropped to 12 degrees below zero. Inside the shelter, pressed against the bow walls, wrapped in her shawl, and buried in spruce bedding, Anya waited for dawn. She didn't freeze. In the morning, she crawled out into a world of hard frost and bitter wind. Her breath crystallized and fell to the ground. Her eyelashes stuck together when she blinked. But she was alive, and she could feel her toes. Martha Henriksen visited a week later, riding through a snowstorm that had dropped 2 inches of wet snow on everything. She found the shelter by accident. She had been looking for a mound of boughs, and instead she found a mound of white. Snow had coated the structure entirely, blanketing it in a layer 3 or 4 inches thick. Only the entrance was visible, a dark hole in the white surface like the mouth of a cave. Anya was inside. "Hello?" Martha called. A moment later, Anya's face appeared in the entrance, flushed, sleepy, but alive. "Mrs. Henriksen." "Good God, child, you're still breathing." Anya climbed out of the shelter, brushing snow from her dress. She looked thin, thinner than before, but her eyes were clear and her movement steady. "The snow makes it warmer," she said. "I can feel the difference." Martha crouched near the entrance and peered inside. The interior was dark, but not as cold as she'd expected. The air that wafted out was cool, not freezing. She could smell spruce and something else. Wood smoke? No, just the warmth of a human body trapped in a small space. How much warmer? A lot. Before the snow, I could see my breath inside. Now I can't. Martha did the math. If Anya couldn't see her breath, The interior was above freezing, at least 32 degrees. Outside, the temperature was hovering near zero, 30 degrees of difference, from body heat and branches and snow. The snow trapped more air, Anya explained, like another layer of wool. And it's quiet now. I can't hear the wind anymore. Martha was silent for a long moment. She had come expecting to find a corpse, or at best a dying child. Instead, she had found something else entirely. I brought food, she said finally. Potatoes, cheese, dried beef. Carl shot too many rabbits, and I have no room in my root cellar. They both knew it was a lie. Martha had plenty of room. She deliberately overprepared. Anya's pride rose up. She could feel it, hot and sharp in her chest. She didn't want charity. She didn't want to owe anyone anything. I can't pay you, she said. I don't want payment. Take it, or I'll throw it in the creek. I don't accept thanks, and I don't want owing. Just don't die. Anya hesitated. Then she reached out and took the sack. Thank you. I told you not to thank me. Martha stood up, brushing snow from her knees. She looked at the shelter again, her eyes moving over the snow-covered boughs, the carefully constructed entrance, the smoke hole at one end that Anya had added for ventilation. It might work, Martha said. The words seemed to surprise her as much as they surprised Anya. The snow will tell us. She rode away. Anya stood in the falling snow, holding the sack of food against her chest. It might work. Those were the first 3 words of hope anyone had spoken to her since she'd arrived in Dakota territory. She carried the food inside and added it to her small store. 7 rabbits, dried and smoked over tiny fires, a handful of dried berries, roots she had dug before the ground froze, maybe 2 weeks of food, maybe 3 if she starved slowly. It wasn't enough. It was nowhere close to enough. But the shelter was working. The snow was helping. And for the first time, Anya allowed herself to believe that she might see spring. November brought more snow, more cold, and a wind that tested every joint and seam of the shelter. On the 3rd day of November, Anya woke to find a section of the north wall stripped bare. A windstorm in the night had torn away a patch of boughs the size of a wagon wheel, exposing the lattice beneath. Cold air poured through the gap. Her temperature buffer was gone. She had maybe hours before the interior reached equilibrium with the outside, before the shelter became useless, just a frame of sticks in the bitter wind. She worked through that day and into the night, cutting fresh boughs by touch in the darkness, layering them over the damaged section. Her hands were so cold she couldn't feel the hatchet handle. Her feet were numb in her cracked boots. Ice formed on her eyelashes, and she had to break it off with her fingernails. By dawn of the 4th day, the wall was repaired. She crawled inside and collapsed on the spruce bedding and slept for 14 hours. When she woke, the interior was warm again. The new boughs had caught the drifting snow, and the snow had sealed the gaps. But she understood something now that she hadn't understood before. The shelter was fragile. One bad storm could undo weeks of work. One failure could kill her. She began adding extra layers to the weakest sections. The north wall, which took the brunt of the wind. The entrance, which was the hardest to seal. The peak, where the ridgepole sometimes shifted in high winds. By mid-November, the shelter was buried under 2 feet of snow. It looked less like a structure now and more like a snowdrift, a white mound among the trees that gave no hint of the girl living inside. The temperature outside dropped to 25 below zero. The temperature inside held at 28 above. A difference of 53 degrees, better than many sod houses, better than some cabins. Martha Henriksen came again, bringing more food and saying little. She crawled inside the shelter and lay there for several minutes, feeling the walls, breathing the air. "It's working," she said when she emerged. "I don't understand how, but it's working." "The snow," Anya said. "The snow is the secret." "The needles catch the snow traps the air holds the heat." Martha shook her head. "It's so simple. Why hasn't anyone else thought of this?" "Maybe someone did. Maybe they're all dead and no one remembers." Martha looked at her sharply. "That's a dark thought." "This is a dark place." Martha had no argument for that. She had buried her husband in this territory. She had watched her neighbors freeze, starve, blow away in windstorms. The frontier was littered with the graves of people who had tried and failed. "January is coming," Martha said. "What we've seen so far, this is nothing. January is when people die." "I know. Do you? Do you really?" "I had a neighbor 3 years ago who froze to death walking from his barn to his house. 80 feet. He couldn't find the door in the whiteout. His wife found him the next morning, standing upright against the wall, frozen solid. His eyes were still open." Anya was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "If I die in January, at least I died trying. That's better than dying in an orphanage." Martha didn't know what to say to that. She gathered her reins and mounted her horse. "I'll come back after the new year," she said, "if you're still alive." "I'll be alive." Martha nodded once. Then she rode away into the white silence of the winter forest. Anja watched her go. Then she crawled back into her shelter and pulled the door closed behind her. January was coming. The real test was still ahead. And somewhere in the west, a mass of cold air was building over the mountains, a wall of ice and wind that would sweep across the plains in a few short weeks and kill 300 people in a single day. But Anya didn't know that yet. All she knew was the snow falling on her shelter, the warmth building inside, and the sound of her own heart beating in the dark. December came in quiet and cold. The shelter performed better than Anya had dared to hope. Snow continued to accumulate on the bough walls, 18 inches by the first week of December, then 24 by Christmas. Each inch added insulation. Each inch made the interior warmer, quieter, more sealed against the wind that screamed across the prairie to the east. She developed routines: wake before dawn, check the snare lines, she had 6 now, set along rabbit runs she had memorized in the autumn. Most days, 1 or 2 held something. Skin the catch, gut it, hang the meat inside the shelter where it would stay cold, but not freeze solid. Gather dead wood for the tiny fires she made outside, always outside, to cook her food and melt snow for water. Never fire inside. The boughs would catch, and she would burn. By mid-December, she had stored enough meat to last 3 weeks. Dried rabbit, smoked over slow fires. Strips of venison from a deer carcass she had found half-eaten by wolves. They had left enough for her, and she had worked through the night to butcher what remained before the meat froze to stone. Her weight had stabilized. She was thin. Would always be thin now, she suspected, but she was no longer starving. The hollow feeling in her belly had become familiar, almost comfortable. She ate once a day, sometimes twice, and her body had learned to make do. The shelter's interior temperature held steady between 25 and 32 degrees, cold enough to see her breath on the worst nights, warm enough to sleep, warm enough to survive. But December wasn't January. Halvor Eriksson heard the reports from trappers who passed through Grafton in late December. There was a girl in the Turtle Mountains, they said, living in some kind of brush pile, still alive somehow. One trapper had seen smoke from her cooking fire and thought it was a Sioux camp until he got closer. Eriksson remembered the girl, the stubborn one, on the road in August, who had looked him in the eye and chosen death over the orphanage. He had assumed she was dead by now. Everyone had assumed she was dead by now. He mentioned it to Martha Henriksen when he saw her at the general store in Grafton, buying salt and flour. "She's alive," Martha said. "I've seen her. The shelter she built, I don't understand it, but it works. She's warm in there. Warmer than you'd believe. A brush shelter can't hold heat in this cold. This one does. The snow builds up on it, and the snow is like a blanket. She says the needles catch the snow. The snow traps the air holds the heat. It's like insulation." Erickson was skeptical. He had seen brush shelters before. Trappers used them for a night or two when they were caught out. They were better than nothing, but barely. The idea that one could sustain a person through a Dakota winter was absurd. "Wait until January," he said. "January sorts the living from the dead. If she's still alive in February, then I'll believe it." Martha said nothing, but she made a note to visit the girl again soon, before the worst of the cold arrived. January 11th, 1888, dawned warm. Anya woke to silence, a different kind of silence than she had grown used to. The wind had stopped. The temperature when she crawled outside to check her snares was almost pleasant, 30 degrees above zero, maybe higher. A false spring dropped into the middle of winter like a gift. She found 2 rabbits in her snares. She skinned them quickly, her hands moving with the ease of long practice. She cooked one over a small fire and ate it slowly, savoring the warmth in her belly. The other she hung inside the shelter for tomorrow. The sun climbed higher. The snow on the shelter began to soften, water dripping from the lower edges where body heat had thinned the crust. Anya spent the afternoon reinforcing weak spots, adding fresh boughs to areas where the old ones had compressed under snow weight. By evening, she felt almost optimistic. She had survived December. She had food for at least 2 weeks. The shelter was holding. Maybe she would make it to spring. She slept deeply that night, warmer than she had been in weeks. She didn't see the wall of cloud building on the northwestern horizon. January 12th. The morning was warmer still, 40 degrees above zero by Anya's estimate. Unnatural for January. Wrong, but she didn't question it. She went to check her snares, taking her time, enjoying the relative comfort of air that didn't burn her lungs. She was a quarter-mile from the shelter when she saw it. A line on the horizon, not clouds exactly, darker than clouds, thicker, moving toward her with a speed that made no sense. The line stretched from one edge of the sky to the other, a solid wall of gray and white that seemed to swallow the landscape as it advanced. Anya had never seen anything like it. For a moment, she simply stared. Then the wind hit. It came before the wall did, a blast of cold so sudden, so violent, that it knocked her backward into the snow. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in the time it took her to stand up. 20 degrees by the time she found her footing. 30. The wall reached her. She couldn't see. That was the first thing she understood. The wind was carrying so much snow that it was like being inside a white room with no walls, nothing visible in any direction, no ground, no sky, no trees. Just white, screaming, moving faster than she could think. She ran. The shelter was a quarter-mile away. She had walked this path 100 times. She knew every tree, every rock, every dip in the ground. But she couldn't see any of them. She couldn't see her own hands in front of her face. The cold bit through her clothes like they weren't there. Her shawl whipped behind her, then tore away. She felt it go, felt the wind rip it from her shoulders. But she couldn't stop to find it. The temperature was still dropping. She could feel it in her bones, in her blood, in the way her fingers were going numb inside her mittens. She ran into a tree. The impact knocked her down, and for a moment she lay in the snow, stunned, the wind howling over her. She could taste blood where she had bitten her tongue. Her head throbbed. Get up! Get up or die. She pulled herself upright, pressing her back against the tree trunk. The tree. She knew this tree, a tall pine with a split trunk about 200 yards from the shelter. She had passed it every day for months. 200 yards. In this wind, in this cold, it might as well be 200 miles. She couldn't run anymore. She could barely walk, but she knew the direction now, and she knew that if she stopped moving, she would die. She pushed off from the tree and stumbled forward. She found the shelter by falling into it. Her foot caught on something, a root, a rock, the edge of the entrance, and she pitched forward, tumbling through the bow door and into the dark interior. Snow followed her in, driven by the wind, coating her clothes and her hair and her face. She turned and grabbed the door, pulling it closed behind her, stuffing her body against the gap to seal out the wind. The roar diminished. The snow stopped swirling. She was inside. But the shelter wasn't warm. The entrance was damaged. The bow door had been partly torn away by the wind, and cold air was pouring through the gaps. The interior temperature, which should have been 30 degrees, felt closer to 10. Her breath fogged. Her wet clothes began to stiffen. She had minutes, maybe less. She couldn't go outside to find materials she couldn't see, couldn't stand against the wind. She had to work with what was inside the shelter. She tore branches from the floor, the spruce boughs she had laid as bedding. She stuffed them into the gaps around the door. Not enough. The wind found every crack, every seam, every place where the boughs didn't quite meet. Then she remembered what she had told Martha Henriksen. The snow is the secret. She pushed her arm through the entrance gap into the howling white. The snow was dry, powdery, driven horizontal by the wind. She scooped handfuls of it and pulled it inside. The snow packed against the boughs. It filled the gaps. It pressed into the cracks and crevices and sealed them tight. She worked for what felt like hours. Could have been 10 minutes, could have been 60. She scooped snow until her arms wouldn't lift anymore. Then she rested and scooped more. She built a wall of snow against the inside of the entrance, leaving only a small hole for air. Slowly, painfully, the temperature inside the shelter began to rise. The wind screamed outside. The shelter groaned and creaked. But it held. Anja lay on the floor, her wet clothes slowly drying against her skin, and she listened to the storm trying to kill her. The blizzard raged for 18 hours. Anja didn't sleep. She couldn't. The sound was too loud, the fear too sharp, the cold too close. She lay in the darkness, wrapped in what remained of her spruce bedding, and she waited. She recited multiplication tables to stay calm. 1 times 1 is 1. 2 times 2 is 4. 3 times 3 is 9. She recited the names of the children on her orphan train car. Anna, Peter, Marta, Johann, Catherine, Sven. 12 names she remembered, faces that blurred together in her memory. She recited her mother's face, the curve of her cheek, the gray of her eyes, the way her mouth moved when she said Anya's name. The wind screamed, the shelter shook. But Anya was still alive. By midnight, snow had buried the shelter entirely. 2 feet of it, then 3, then 4. The weight pressed down on the bow roof, compressing it, but the branches held. They bent but didn't break. The lattice of needles caught the snow and distributed the load across the whole structure. And something strange happened. The temperature inside the shelter began to rise. Not dramatically, not like a stove, not like a fire, but steadily, degree by degree, as the snow accumulated above her. 20 degrees became 22. 22 became 25. 25 became 28. The snow wasn't crushing her. The snow was saving her. 4 feet of snow above the shelter meant 4 feet of insulation. R 4 for each foot, compounding with the bough layer beneath. The combined insulation value was higher than most frontier sod houses, higher than many cabins. Outside, the temperature dropped to 40 below zero. The wind chill pushed the equivalent temperature past 80 below. Men froze to death in their barns, walking from stall to stall. Children died in schoolhouses, huddled around stoves that couldn't keep up with the cold. Cattle froze, standing upright, ice forming on their eyeballs, their bodies found in the spring exactly as they had stood. Inside the pine corridor, Anya Mikkelsen lay in the dark, and her breath no longer fogged in the air. She could feel her toes. She could move her fingers. She was alive. The wind died before dawn on January 13th. Anya woke to silence, true silence, the kind that rang in the ears. No wind, no sound. Even the creak of the shelter had stopped, the structure settling into the snow that now surrounded it completely. She had to dig her way out. The entrance was buried under 2 feet of drift. She scooped snow with her hands, pushing it behind her, tunneling through the white darkness until her fingers broke through into open air. Cold, clean, still. She emerged into a world transformed. The forest was white. Every tree was coated in snow, every branch bent under the weight. The sky was pale blue, washed clean by the storm. The sun, just rising over the eastern hills, turned the snow to diamonds. And it was cold, 40 below, maybe colder. The air froze the moisture in her nose when she breathed. Her eyelashes stuck together when she blinked. But she was alive. She stood in the snow outside her shelter and looked at what the storm had made. The pine corridor was invisible now, just a mound in the drifts, indistinguishable from the natural terrain. No one would know a girl lived inside. No one would know anyone could survive in there. But she had. She turned a slow circle, looking at the forest, at the sky, at the white world that stretched in every direction. "I'm alive," she said out loud. Her voice cracked. She hadn't spoken in days. "I'm alive." The words echoed in the frozen air and fell away into silence. Martha Henriksen came on the 14th. She had spent the storm in her sod house, huddled around the stove with her son Carl, listening to the wind tear at the walls. When the wind stopped, she had dug out her door and found her world erased, every landmark buried, every path gone, the landscape remade by the snow. She had assumed Anya was dead. Everyone would assume Anya was dead. A brush shelter couldn't survive a storm like that. Nothing could survive a storm like that except a solid house and a hot fire. She snowshoed into the mountains anyway. She owed the girl that much to find her body, to give her a proper burial, to tell someone, someday, that the orphan girl from New York had tried. She found the shelter by the thin wisp of smoke rising from it. Anja was outside, melting snow for water over a tiny fire of dead branches. She looked up when Martha approached, and her face broke into a smile so unexpected, so genuine, that Martha felt tears sting her eyes. "Mrs. Henriksen." "Good God, child." Martha's voice cracked. "You're still breathing." "The snow kept me warm." "The snow?" Martha stopped. She looked at the shelter, the mound of white with its thin column of smoke. She looked at Anya, thin and ragged but alive, unmistakably alive. "That's impossible." "No, it's just physics." Martha stared at her for a long moment. Then she laughed, a sound that startled both of them, sharp and strange in the frozen silence. "You should be dead," Martha said. "I know. Everyone should be dead who isn't in a proper house. I heard from Grafton, 300 people died in the storm, 300. Children in schoolhouses, men in their barns, families frozen in their beds because their stoves went out." Martha shook her head. "And you survived in a pile of sticks." "It's not sticks. It's insulation. The needles catch the snow traps the air. I know. You told me. I didn't believe you. Martha's voice was quiet now. I thought you were clever. I didn't think you were right. She walked to the shelter and crouched near the entrance. She could feel the warmth radiating from inside, not hot, but warm. Living warm. The kind of warm that meant someone could survive in there. May I? She asked. Anya nodded. Martha crawled inside. The interior was dark, lit only by the dim light filtering through the entrance tunnel. The walls were boughs and snow, and something else, a kind of solidity that felt like being inside a living thing. She lay on her back and looked up at the curved ceiling, at the way the branches interlocked, at the way the snow pressed down but didn't crush. It was warm. Not hot, not comfortable, but warm, survivably warm. She lay there for several minutes, breathing the spruce-scented air, feeling the shelter around her. Then she crawled out. Every trapper on the plains needs to see this, she said. Halvar Eriksson came in late January. He had heard the reports now. Everyone had heard the reports. The orphan girl who survived the blizzard in a brush shelter. It sounded like a tall tale, the kind of story that got bigger with each telling. He didn't believe it, but he had buried two of his neighbors in the week after the storm, found them frozen in their own dooryard, 10 feet from their sod house, unable to find the door in the whiteout. Good people, strong people, dead because they couldn't see through the snow. And the orphan girl was alive. He rode into the mountains on a bitter afternoon, following directions Martha Henriksen had given him. He found the shelter exactly where she said it would be, a mound of snow with a dark entrance, smoke rising from somewhere inside. Anya emerged when she heard his horse. Mr. Eriksson. He dismounted slowly. His bones ached in this cold. 12 years on the frontier had worn them down. He walked to the shelter and stood before it, studying the structure with eyes that had seen many things built and many things destroyed. You should be dead, he said. So I've been told. I said the wolves would find you before Christmas. They didn't. I said the cold would kill you if the wolves didn't. It didn't. Eriksson was quiet for a long moment. Then he lowered himself to his knees, groaning at the protest in his joints, and he crawled into the entrance. He stayed inside for a long time. Martha had told him what to expect, but telling wasn't the same as feeling. The warmth surprised him, not just the presence of it, but the quality of it. Solid and steady, like a cellar in summer. The air was still. The walls absorbed every sound. He lay on his back and closed his eyes and tried to reconcile what he knew, that this was a pile of branches covered in snow, with what he felt, that this was a shelter, a real shelter, something that could keep a person alive. He couldn't reconcile it. It didn't make sense. But here he was, and the girl was alive. He crawled out and stood before Anya, brushing snow from his coat. I've been homesteading this territory for 12 years, he said. I've buried 2 wives and a son. I've seen men die in ways you can't imagine, frozen, starved, crushed, burned, drowned. I've seen storms that killed cattle by the thousands and cold that cracked iron bars. He paused. I've never seen anything like this. It's just the snow, Anya said. The snow does the work. No, you did the work. The snow just... He searched for the word. The snow just agreed with you. He turned to look at the shelter again. Then he turned back to Anya. I told you that you were walking toward your death. I was wrong. I apologize. Anya didn't know what to say. No adult had ever apologized to her. I accept your apology, she said finally. Eriksson nodded. Then he looked toward the east, toward Grafton and the settlements beyond. We should send for the county surveyor. he said. Someone should draw this. Someone should write it down. If more people knew, if more people understood, I can show anyone who wants to see. Then I'll send them. Every trapper, every homesteader, everyone who'll listen. He looked at her with something new in his eyes. Not pity anymore, not skepticism, but something that might have been respect. What you've built here, it could save lives. Many lives. Anja looked at the shelter. Her shelter. The thing she had built with a hatchet in her hands, and the knowledge that she would die if she didn't try. Then send them, she said. I'll show them everything. They came. February brought a trickle of visitors, trappers first, then homesteaders, then curious townspeople from Grafton who had heard the story and wanted to see for themselves. Anja showed them all. She explained the construction, the A-frame of poles, the lattice of branches, the layering of boughs like shingles. She explained the principle. The needles catch the snow traps the air holds the heat. Some of them believed her, some of them didn't, but all of them crawled inside and felt the warmth, and all of them emerged with questions in their eyes. A trapper named Bjorn Solberg built a version for his trapline camp in March. He reported to Martha Henriksen that it was warmer than expected. A homesteader's wife named Ingrid Larsen added a small pine corridor to the back of her sod house, a place to store vegetables through the cold months. She found that her potatoes lasted longer in there than in her root cellar. The Grafton newspaper ran a small item about the orphan girls' snow shelter in late March, 3 paragraphs, back page, between an advertisement for patent medicine and a notice about a church social. Few people read it. Fewer remembered. But the people who had seen the shelter remembered. And they told others, who told others still. By spring, at least 7 families in Pembina County had built versions of Anja's design. Not for living in, no one wanted to live in a pile of branches, but for emergencies, for storage, for the peace of mind that came from knowing that if the worst happened, if the stove went out and the blizzard trapped them far from shelter, there was a way to survive. Anja showed them all. She never asked for payment. My mother taught me to share what I know, she said when Eriksen offered her money for teaching. I don't charge for what was given to me. The knowledge came from observation, from desperation, from the forest itself. She hadn't invented it, she had discovered it. And now she gave it away. Gunnar Lundgren never spoke to Anja again. When asked about her, he said, "That girl is unnatural. No Christian child builds a nest like an animal." But he said it quietly now, and fewer people listened. The blizzard had killed his best milk cow and collapsed part of his barn roof. His opinion on survival carried less weight than it used to. Martha Henriksen built a small pine corridor attached to her hay barn, an emergency shelter for her son Carl if he was ever caught out in a storm. She told Anja, "I was wrong. Clever kept you alive." "Not just clever," Anja said, "lucky too, and stubborn." "Mostly stubborn," Martha agreed. And for the first time in months they both laughed. Spring came slowly to the Turtle Mountains. The snow melted in April, revealing the bones of the winter, the dead branches, the frozen carcasses of animals that hadn't made it, the sad remnants of things that had been buried and forgotten. The pine corridor sagged as the snow that had supported it disappeared, the boughs compressing under their own weight. By May, it was just a pile of branches again, a skeleton, a memory. Anja didn't rebuild it. She didn't need to. Martha Henriksen filed papers with the county court in June, formally adopting the girl who had survived the winter in a pile of sticks. The judge required little convincing. Everyone in Pembina County knew the story by then, and no one wanted to be the official who sent the orphan girl back to Fargo. Anja moved into the Henriksen sod house. She learned to read and write fluently. She had known the basics from her mother, but Martha filled in the gaps. She learned to farm, to tend cattle, to survive in the ways the frontier demanded, and she kept the hatchet, the little camp hatchet with the hickory handle, worn smooth from use, the one the Lungren boy had lost and she had found, the tool that had built the shelter that had saved her life. She never let it out of her sight. In the summer of 1894, Anja Mikkelsen married a surveyor named Thomas Carr. She was 19 years old. He was 27. They had met when he came to the Henriksen homestead to mark property lines, and he had stayed for dinner, and then for another dinner, and then for a winter during which he had found reasons to visit every week. He knew about the Pine Corridor. Everyone in the territory knew about the Pine Corridor by then. It had become part of local legend, a story parents told children about what was possible when you had no other choice. Thomas didn't think it was a legend. He thought it was engineering. You discovered something, he told her. Something important. The relationship between snow and insulation, someone should study it properly. Someone should document it. It's been documented, Anja said. Eskimos have known it for thousands of years. Indigenous people all over the north. I just rediscovered it, I suppose. But you proved it could work with materials anyone could gather. Branches, snow, body heat, that's different. She shrugged. It kept me alive. That's all I needed it to do. They moved to Bismarck after the wedding. Thomas worked for the Territorial Land Office, surveying claims across the Dakota prairies. Anja kept house, raised 3 children, and was known among the neighbors for one peculiarity. She always kept an emergency supply of evergreen boughs in her woodshed, even though she had a stove and a proper house, and no need for a pine corridor ever again. Just in case, she said when people asked. They learned not to ask. Anja Mikkelsen Carr died in 1951 at the age of 76. Her obituary ran in the Bismarck Tribune, 3 inches, noting her surviving children and grandchildren, her membership in the Lutheran Church, her long residence in the community. It mentioned that she had been a pioneer child and a survivor of the frontier era. It did not mention the Pine Corridor. By 1951, most of the people who remembered the winter of 1887 to 88 were dead. The school children's blizzard had passed out of living memory and into history books, where it was mentioned in a paragraph and then forgotten. But somewhere in the Turtle Mountains, if you knew where to look, you could still find the remnants of the shelter. A hollow between 3 spruce trees, a shallow depression where the ground had settled after decades of rot, and the rusted head of a camp hatchet that Anja had left behind when she moved to the Henriksen homestead. She had kept the handle. She never explained why. On January 12th, 1888, the temperature dropped 40 degrees in 3 hours. Halvor Eriksson, who had survived 11 Dakota winters, had looked at a 12-year-old girl on an empty road and told her plainly, "A child cannot keep herself alive out there. The wolves will find her before Christmas, and if they don't, the cold will." He had been certain. He had been experienced. He had been wrong. Inside a corridor of pine boughs and accumulated snow, in the howling dark of the worst blizzard in a generation, Anja Mikkelsen lay on a bed of spruce branches and listened to the wind trying to kill her. The wolves never found her. The cold tried, but the needles held the snow, and the snow held the air, and the air held the heat of her body, the only heat she had. 50 degrees of difference between life and death. Built with a hatchet, 9 weeks of work, and the refusal to go back to a cage. The skeptics came in February. They crawled inside her shelter and felt the walls and lay in the dark where she had lain. And one by one, they said the words she had earned. "You should be dead. You're not." She never built another pine corridor. She never needed to. But she kept the hatchet until the day she died. And every winter when the snow began to fall, she would step outside and watch the flakes settle on the evergreen branches, catching, accumulating, building a blanket of white that trapped the air and held the warmth. The needles held the snow held the heat. The 12-year-old girl who had walked west with 14 cents and a hatchet had understood something that grown men with cabins and stoves had not. Sometimes survival isn't about having more. Sometimes it's about needing less.